Silicon Valley put technology into everything that you see and touch in your life.
The transformations are so vast, we're just barely keeping up with them.
Now we're such a magnet. People come from all over the world. They just want to be part of it.
If you're serious about succeeding in finance, you go to New York City. If you're serious about the movies, you go to Hollywood. If you're serious about science and technology, you come to Silicon Valley.
It draws people with that vision of technological promise.
It's a magnet that you cannot demagnetize.
It's a spaceship that with a single click can take us anywhere. And it's a department store, a library, and an office, a theater, and a navigator. This digital genie can do almost anything. Google has expanded our capabilities beyond our wildest dreams. It's the kind of quantum leap we've come to expect from Silicon Valley.
One of the things that's fascinating about Silicon Valley is that it self-consciously aims to change the world. This is a place that changes history.
The story of the Valley is typically told as the story in which heroic entrepreneurial individuals suddenly find inside themselves the intellectual fortitude and the personal drive to create technologies that change the world. It's a highly individualistic story. It's deeply resonant with American myth and American history, but it's not the case.
The fact is, the heroes of Silicon Valley could not have done what they did without a lot of help, provided by taxpayers through government and military contracts, by an outward-looking university, by a new breed of investors, and waves of immigrants.
A lot of people have tried to replicate it around the world, and not many have succeeded.
People with drive and ambition have been feeling the Valley's magnetic attraction since the 1840s.
The Valley attracted dreamers and visionaries and rebels because California had already attracted those people.
People like Leland Stanford, a New Yorker drawn by the gold rush. His legacy will shape the Valley for the next 150 years. In 1861, he co-founds the Central Pacific Railroad.
And the railroad brought in rivers of money.
Wealth that enables him to catalyze one of the Valley's earliest innovations. Stanford, who has a lifelong passion for racehorses, buys a farm south of San Francisco, in the region we know today as Silicon Valley.
The speed of the horse was something that fascinated him, and he wanted to develop a training system that would break down the horse's gait into parts in order to reassemble it into a faster-moving animal.
But scientists at the time don't really know how horses run, whether all 4 feet, for example, leave the ground at the same time. Stanford wants to end that uncertainty.
And he thinks about, in a pattern we see again and again in the Valley, how can technology be used to answer this question?
So in 1872, Stanford hires photographer Edward Muybridge to solve the mystery.
He set up a shed with a dozen cameras pointed out of a long window, and he ran the horses past this shed and photographed them in rapid succession.
And through his serial photography, was able to reveal that when a horse runs, they actually lift all 4 legs off the ground. That was not something that people had seen before then. Muybridge's camera revealed it.
For the first time, motion is captured using a camera, a breakthrough that will soon inspire the invention of movies. But shortly after publishing a book of the photos, Stanford is struck by tragedy. In 1884, his 15-year-old son contracts typhoid fever and dies.
His parents went into a fog of grief. But when they emerged from this fog, they decided that they would memorialize their boy by creating a school in his name.
On the grounds of their farm in the valley town of Palo Alto, they build Leland Stanford Jr. University.
Stanford regarded it as a school for the practical instruction of engineers and of people who would be useful in industry.
And I think he always wanted his university to be a kind of island of innovation that way.
Leland Stanford was a pioneer. He was very interested in developing new technologies. It's just an attitude that he endowed the university with, as well as with money.
Over the years, Stanford alumni have founded some 70,000 companies. They've created more than 5 million jobs, and today generate revenues of $2.7 trillion a year. The first Stanford startup is founded in 1909 by a young graduate named Cyril Elwell, who will transform the new field of radio. He wants it to do more than simply transmit the dots and dashes of Morse code. In this house in Palo Alto, he figures out a way to broadcast music.
One of Cy's first demonstrations was when he put on his phonograph in his home in Palo Alto and transmitted the Blue Danube Waltz to another home in Los Altos, California.
But Elwell's sound quality is sketchy. He knows that a Danish inventor named Valdemar Poulsen has developed a better way to transmit voices and music with something called an arc transmitter. Elwell goes to Denmark and licenses the rights to the arc. Stanford's president, David Starr Jordan, is impressed by Elwell and helps him to start a company.
He makes a founding investment of $500 in Federal Telegraph. In a sense, he becomes the first modern tech VC.
In California, Elwell uses the new transmitters to send voices wirelessly some 50 miles in well-publicized demonstrations. Elwell soon lands a lucrative contract with a big new client that badly needs his technology.
The Navy had used radio very early in communicating from ship to ship and ship to shore, but they had not done it with voice. It was all dots and dashes.
Elwell's radios mark a big step forward, but reception is often faint. It's a problem that a debt-ridden inventor in San Francisco named Lee DeForest is trying to solve. He is developing a new kind of vacuum tube, but he's broke and needs a place to work.
He's trying to invent something that will make him rich enough he can pay off all of his debts. So who does he contact? He contacts Cy Elwell,
who invites DeForest to come work in his lab in the valley.
And he starts playing around with the plates inside the vacuum tube and looking at the flow of electrons, and he ends up creating an amplifier. He hangs an Ingersoll watch in front of a microphone that's hooked up to one of these tube amplifiers with a headset on, and just about pops his eardrums because the noise is so loud, and he realizes he's got it. Remember crystal radios, you had to move that little cat's whisker around on the crystal and wear headphones because it was so soft. Now you can put that vacuum tube there, amplify the sound, and you've got radio.
By the 1930s, the place that would become known as Silicon Valley is a hotbed of electronics innovation. And that burgeoning reputation attracts even more tinkerers and dreamers, whose bold advances help create a military superpower and take Americans to the frontiers of space. Humans dwelling far above their planet. The most sophisticated military the world has ever known. Advances that would have been impossible without the technologies of Silicon Valley. Many of them funded by government contracts. And many of those technologies originate at Stanford University's School of Engineering.
Well, Don, I think one of the first things that we should tell our viewers tonight is that we will see, probably for the first time, a billion-watt electron linear accelerator. Is that right? That's right, Bob. Or in plain talk, an atom smasher. But that's just...
This lab is run by Stanford's Dean of Engineering, Fred Terman. He becomes known as the father of Silicon Valley.
So far tonight, sir, we've seen several graduate students working here. Where do these people come from?
They represent graduates of some 75 different schools from all over the United States and from 10 or a dozen foreign countries. We have a large and rapidly expanding electronics industry in this region, and there are plenty of attractive jobs here.
That industry is kick-started by Terman back in 1938, when he uses $500 of university money to entice two former students named Hewlett and Packard to start a business. Their company will one day employ more than 300,000 people and be valued at more than $100 billion. But World War II interrupts Terman's plans to start more companies in the Valley. In 1942, he relocates to the Boston area to head a secret research lab funded by the government.
And Fred Terman realized the really important role that the federal government could play in fostering science and engineering and scientific discovery, and also that there was a potential for Stanford to really become a powerhouse of his own.
After the war, Terman returns to Stanford, only to discover that Uncle Sam has passed it by.
MIT got tens of millions of dollars in government research funds. Harvard got tens of millions of dollars. Columbia, Caltech, every, in fact, major engineering school during World War II was funded for research. And Stanford got $50,000 for teacher training. And Terman came back and said, never gonna happen again.
And so he very aggressively built an engineering department and an aerospace engineering group in particular that were focused on going after military contracts and military development.
Terman begins landing contracts to help America arm itself for a new foreign conflict, the Cold War.
Will there be peace or war?
What Terman did then was incredibly unique. Most universities that had military research contracts would in fact focus both research and then production of the systems inside the university. But Terman didn't want to turn Stanford into a military factory. So what he said to his students was, take my technology, take your technology, take anything in our lab and go leave Stanford and do something great for the country. And back then, great for the country meant, let's help us win this Cold War with the Soviet Union. And what started to happen in the 50s is first a trickle and then a flood of microwave components companies, systems companies.
You had this massive government investment in science, not just the development of new products, but actually funding basic research and saying, okay, we're going to give you some money just to play around with these ideas and see what happens.
One of the Valley's recipients is the Ames Aeronautical Laboratory in Sunnyvale, a government aviation lab that runs the world's biggest collection of wind tunnels.
This was the highest of high-technology laboratories in aerospace research, and they recruited from all over the country. These were the best and the brightest, and they were able to use really big toys. These wind tunnels collected massive amounts of data. They were in operation all the time, so there was a huge demand for instrumentation. And Hewlett-Packard, as an example, provided a lot of the instrumentation. And it was a very exciting time.
Moscow newspapers were first. Then headlines around the world echoed the news. Russia had blasted a man-made moon into outer space. The Soviets had scored a scientific first.
Sputnik was a very important moment. It was when the U.S. realized it absolutely had to, compete with the Soviet Union. And it's not a coincidence that Sputnik was in 1957, and in 1958, you get NASA set up by the government.
NASA takes over the Ames lab in the Valley.
NASA was desperate to get to the moon. The United States wanted to beat the Russians. The problem is you couldn't build rocket ships with vacuum tubes. And that was crucial because every new idea in Silicon Valley needs what we call early adopters, someone who is happy to pay way too much for something that doesn't quite work. They don't care what it costs, they want to be the first to have it.
Government funding not only drives the space race, but also fuels the arms race. One of the biggest beneficiaries, the Lockheed Corporation, which opens a plant in the Valley to manufacture the Navy's Polaris missile.
In a froth of bubbles, the bullet-shaped missile surfaced.
And in 1956, Lockheed's employee count was 0. In 1960, it had 20,000 employees building missiles in the middle of what would become Silicon Valley.
The growing number of space and defense contractors draws thousands more scientists, engineers, and technicians to the valley, all supported by even broader government investment.
You had a big investment in infrastructure, not only federal investment, but also state investment. The state of California is building its university system. It's subsidizing roads, it's subsidizing the development of new towns, of new subdivisions. This massive public investment laid the groundwork for the new economy.
The new arrivals find jobs at the companies founded by Fred Terman's graduates, companies he promotes by cutting deals.
And the first thing that Terman and his professors would do would call up guys at Lockheed in the military and the Air Force and Navy and say, hey, we got some great new company here that have these great devices. You guys ought to go give them a contract. And pretty soon this rainmaking network of entrepreneurship just kind of collected together and coalesced around Stanford.
The military and military-related companies and industries were the backbone of the economy of the Valley probably from the 50s through the 70s.
And into this booming environment, in 1956, swaggers one of America's top scientists who will lead the Valley away from vacuum tubes and into a new era.
The same year Lockheed came to town, someone named Shockley came to town.
I target the birth of what we think of today as Silicon Valley to the arrival of William Shockley.
Shockley brings with him his groundbreaking invention. It's a small device, yet its impact will transform not just the Valley, but the world.
That's one small step for man.
Today, though we may not realize it, the technology pioneered by William Shockley is in everything around us. From coffee makers to EKGs, washing machines to parking meters, big league scoreboards, and almost every electronic device you've ever owned. It's called the transistor.
The transistor redefines electronics.
It's a tiny component that regulates the flow of electricity.
Think of it as a switch. You know, the light switch in your house. That's an on-off switch, controlling the flow of electrons.
No device would have a more powerful effect on the development of Silicon Valley. And Shockley, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who co-invents the transistor, helps to set that transformation in motion.
Shockley is an interesting character. He had fantastic physical intuition. One of my colleagues suggested Shockley could even see electrons. He had such a good idea what was going to happen in some of these complex structures.
Transistors replace vacuum tubes, but are much smaller and generate far less heat. What makes them work is a solid substance called a semiconductor that can be engineered to either block or pass electrons. Shockley has ideas for how to make transistors even better, but he's embroiled in disputes with his colleagues at New Jersey's Bell Labs. So he decides to start his own company. He picks a site in the Valley, near Palo Alto, where he grew up, and where his mother still lives.
So he comes to Palo Alto and gathers the best talent in the world, the greatest young minds in solid-state physics.
When he was hiring, he had us go through a set of IQ and psychology-related tests.
How'd you do?
Well, interestingly enough, he let me see Bob Noyce's test results and Bob see mine, and we were very similar. Intelligence was okay, but neither of us were ever going to be a manager. I think Shockley should have taken one of those tests also.
Shockley Semiconductor becomes the first of what will be hundreds of transistor companies in the Valley.
I mean, before Shockley, there was nothing. Then you had Shockley, who was a brilliant guy, but kind of screwball, too.
Shockley was probably the world's best talent spotter, combined with the world's worst management style. He believed in command and control. I'll tell you what to do, you'll follow my rules, no innovation required, here's what we're building, and I won't tell you why.
As the months roll by, tensions become unbearable. Finally, on September 18, 1957, 8 of Shockley's top employees, including Noyce and Moore, all simultaneously quit. They become known as the Traitorous Eight. An introduction to a Wall Street investment banker, Arthur Rock, changes their fortunes and the history of the Valley.
They would have been very happy if we got them jobs. But I just saw more in it than that.
By luck, or by providence, Arthur Rock met up with Sherman Fairchild, the founder of Fairchild Cameron Instrument. He was a technology buff.
Fairchild agrees to put up over $1 million to start a new division of his company in the Valley. The 8 will not only work at Fairchild Semiconductor, but also own stock.
We took these 8 fellows and collectively decided that we'd take a chance at trying to form a company so that they could own equity. It seemed pretty straightforward to me.
Even Art Rock, when he started, didn't appreciate what was going on. He was just trying to solve a problem. But very much in the Silicon Valley tradition, it eventually dawned on him, wait a second, I didn't just solve a problem, we're creating a whole new model.
And Rock gives that model a name, venture capital, where investors not only acquire shares in companies, but also help run them.
The venture capital people are great orchestrators of pulling together the resources, the knowledge, the relationships, and the money necessary to prop up a small company. Without them, we wouldn't have the Valley.
The novel deal that creates Fairchild will pay off for its founders and for the Valley.
Fairchild was like a catalyst for what then becomes an explosion of technological development over the next 50 years.
That explosion begins when Fairchild devises a new way to switch the semiconductor used in most transistors from germanium, a rare substance, to one found in ordinary sand. Silicon transistors are more reliable and heat-resistant. They soon find their way into everything from rockets to radios, and earn the Valley its famous name. But the Valley's rise will not include the man who set it in motion. William Shockley loses his place at the pinnacle of electronics. His company is sold in 1960 at a loss. He then devotes years of his life to a quixotic crusade, promoting crackpot ideas about race and intelligence.
That the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus
a notion that experts on intelligence dismiss as having no basis in science. In 1989, the once lauded scientist dies a pariah. Although the Valley rejects Shockley's extreme views, other kinds of bias linger. Today, the Valley's tech workforce is about 90% white and Asian, only 2% black, and fewer than 1 in 3 tech employees are women.
The culture of Silicon Valley has been, from the beginning, not just white, but also very male.
It's just an industry that's still got a dearth of women in it, and yet it believes it's a meritocracy. That's not a good combination.
If you're not doing something hard, you're wasting your time.
In 1986, Heidi Roizen, CEO of the software company Teamaker, and one of the few women CEOs in Silicon Valley, applies for $1 million bank loan.
The bank invited me to a dinner of other people like me, other CEOs of technology companies who were applying for debt from this particular bank. And they had this dinner for 10 or 12 of us. And I walked in, and first of all, it was a scotch tasting. I can't stand scotch. Everyone was talking about their golf games. I don't play golf. I was the only woman in the room. I was sitting there, I was thinking, how do I make conversation? How do I get in the game here? It was one of those moments where I just thought to myself, I'm not going to be getting a loan from this bank. And in fact, I didn't get a loan from that bank.
Roizen is far from the only woman who's felt unwelcome in the Valley.
This place is not for everyone. There's a lot of testosterone. There's a lot of competition.
Companies often demand long hours that can be almost impossible for women with children.
You look at a place like Google, which builds in cafeterias, sushi bars, get your dry cleaning done. Everything is organized to make sure that you spend as much time as possible inside the company.
So today, the Valley's high-tech workforce is overwhelmingly male. And yet, women have been essential to the Valley's history.
In the origins of Silicon Valley, women were the assembly workers. They were the production workers. The stereotypes all are that women have small hands, women can do this very close work that was involved with electronics assembly.
During World War II, some of the first programmers are women.
They were actually called computers because they were computing ballistics trajectories using differential math, and these were math majors. These were the women I look up to who were pioneering and breaking ground and solving really complex problems, not getting a lot of credit for it, but who really established the foundations of computing in some important ways.
But during the decades after the war, women lose their foothold in computing.
Part of the culture of hackers and coders is something that comes out of an era, the 1950s and 1960s, when you end up with a face of the Valley that is overwhelmingly male. And that culture has kind of gotten baked in to the whole system.
But some women find ways to break down barriers.
I was a girl geek. I always knew that I wanted to have a career in the sciences. I majored in biophysics at UC Berkeley, and then I fell in love with software.
In 1989, Kim Polesi joins one of the Valley's top computer companies, Sun Microsystems.
Occasionally look around the room, realize you're the only woman, but it's kind of like, well, so what? Now let's get back to business.
She's part of the team that develops Java, the programming language that brings motion to the World Wide Web. In 1996, Polesi co-founds a business software company, Marimba, and becomes its CEO.
As one of the few women CEOs, I got a lot of attention, and some of it was kind of strange. I would be giving a speech about the future of the internet or what Java was, and it would end up being this fluffy piece about, what I was wearing. It was frustrating at times, but I did my best really to ignore the silly stuff.
Led by Polesi, Marimba thrives. When it's sold, it fetches a price of $239 million.
There's one thing that I think has been a theme throughout my career, it's persistence. And anyone that I've seen who's been successful here in the Valley, it's never giving up.
Heidi Roizen's ambition to run a tech company has its roots in her Valley childhood.
For me, this is my hometown. My father came here to work for Ampex in the 50s and worked on the early video tape recorders. My father was not so much encouraging me to be an engineer as he was encouraging me to be an entrepreneur.
Like so many people in the Valley's history, Roizen attends Stanford and goes on to its business school. In 1983, she and her brother Peter, a software engineer, start their company, T-Maker.
We were running for a number of years before we decided that we were missing the opportunity to put the company on a faster growth trajectory.
Roizen needs money and seeks advice from a friend, Ann Winblad, a former software CEO who started her own venture capital fund.
She had a very efficient business model. Even though she was selling software at low prices, it was a very high gross margin. She knew how to build a profit.
So she was helping me with my pitch.
Roizen receives an offer, or term sheet, from another VC.
And at that point, Ann said to me, I don't want you to take their term sheet. I want you to take my term sheet. And then she gave me a term sheet at a lower valuation. And I said, well, what the hell is this? And she said, well, I'm better than that other firm for you, and I'm going to be a better partner to you. And I knew she was going to be an amazing partner.
In the end, it was acquired for a nice sum of money, so it had a great outcome for the entrepreneur, Heidi and her team, as well as for us, the investor.
But the successes of some Valley women have not eliminated the prevailing bias.
Another high-profile Silicon Valley company is being sued on sex discrimination claims.
But discrimination and diversity has been a recurring issue across Silicon Valley.
I'm perplexed by the fact that we're still dealing with this problem. Back then, in 1996, when we co-founded Marimba and I was getting some of this strange reaction, I thought, well, this will all be gone in 10 years. There will be so many more women founding and building companies. This is just a blip in time. Unfortunately, 20 years later now, things have changed for the better, but they certainly are not where they need to be.
In the Valley, men have always been more likely to be judged solely on their merits, even if they've immigrated from the other side of the world. One of them is a young Punjabi physicist who comes here in hot pursuit of an idea.
It was a professor of mine who was teaching physics. And during the course, he said, light travels in straight lines. I thought about that a little bit and decided that he was wrong. And so that became the mission of my life.
A mission that would ultimately transform the way we communicate through technology he called fiber optics.
The Valley is a really interesting place in the way different kinds of people have coalesced here. This is a place which is part of that vision of progress. And that vision is deeply American, but it also has been a magnet for people around the world.
There's no stronger evidence of the magnetism of Silicon Valley than the fact that more than a third of its people are foreign-born.
The thing that immigrants bring to the party, so to speak, is the Silicon Valley DNA and hyperdrive.
New ideas are born of people with multiple perspectives who come in with a belief that they can make a difference.
One of those people is physicist Narinder Singh Kapani. His innovations will create a new industry and lead the Valley into the world of medical technology. When Kapani arrives in the Valley in 1960, there aren't yet many people from India.
When I first got here, there was only 2 Indian restaurants in all of Northern California. And they were both in the city of San Francisco. And now every street has Indian food. I came from a generation that did not believe in having a PhD. Having a PhD made you absent-minded, thinking professor. And I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Our other choice was going to Boston. But I had a strong feeling in favor of Silicon Valley. Large number of people from different parts of the world. People love entrepreneurs. I think you could see the beginnings of something that basically emerged to make Silicon Valley what it is today.
Kapani has come to start a business, one that will make practical use of work he's been doing for years in India and England. Research on how to make light travel along a curved path.
I tried to do something in India, but using mirrors and lenses and so on to bend light around corners. But it wasn't until I went to England at Imperial College in London that I decided to use fibers of glass. If you take a rod of glass, transparent glass, and from the end you send the light in it, even though the rod is bent, it still gets transmitted to the other end.
Kapani coins the term fiber optics. And when he and his wife arrive in Silicon Valley, he has already developed this technology to give doctors a new way to see inside the human body.
You see, they used to have telescopic system to look inside the body, and that was horrible. People had to have psychiatric examination to be able to shove this thing down the throat into the stomach.
But a fiber optic endoscope is flexible.
I actually made the devices to have large number of fibers aligned together so that when you take a bundle of fibers, you can form an image on it and the whole image is transmitted down.
In search of investors, Kapani wrangles a meeting with the legendary founders of Hewlett-Packard.
My pitch was that we want to start this company with fibers and lasers and optical thin films and other devices, and they bought it.
Hewlett-Packard and other Valley investors enable Kapani's company, Optics Technology, to keep on innovating with light.
I think every 3-4 months there was a new invention we were coming up with.
Kapani also pioneers some of the earliest surgical uses of lasers to treat detached retinas.
When the retina gets a detachment, it was not easy to seal it back to itself. Except with the laser, you focus it down, and that gives you the coagulation there, and you could do it. So we demonstrated that first on animals, and then on human size. And then Bob Hope. Bob Hope had a detached retina, so we did that on him too. And then we took that company public in 1967 at $12 a share. And in 6 months, it went up to $60 a share.
Kapani is the first Indian entrepreneur in the Valley to take a company public, paving the way for the many who would follow. Today, more than half of the Valley's engineers were born in other countries.
Doing something that is really innovative and cutting edge and that you can't do anywhere else, that is a compelling story, and that's why they come here.
The roster of immigrants who have shaped Silicon Valley includes Alexander Ponyatov from Russia, founder of Ampex; Andrew Grove from Hungary, CEO of Intel; Jerry Yang from Taiwan, co-founder of Yahoo; Andreas Bechtelsheim from Germany; and Vinod Khosla from India, co-founders of Sun Microsystems; Elon Musk from South Africa, founder of Tesla; and from Russia, a young man named Sergey Brin.
Sergey's mother was disappointed he didn't complete his PhD, she told me. I was like, well, everything else turned out okay.
It's hard to think of another Valley company whose name is said as often by so many.
We say the internet gathered up all the world's information and gave us access to it. No, Google gathered up all the world's information and gave us access to it. It's really the ability to search for knowledge that is the transformative event of our era.
This global giant, like so many of the Valley's legendary firms, owes its founding to the Valley's magnetic attraction, a force that draws two ambitious young people here.
It's, two people out of Stanford, that never had a job before and started what today is one of the most successful companies in the world.
Larry Page is from Michigan. Sergey Brin, born in Russia, grows up in Maryland. After college, each wants to pursue a PhD in computer science. Each decides to come to the Valley, to Stanford, where in 1995 they meet. The next year, they decide to work together on a thesis project to improve the sorry state of search on the internet.
Search on the internet had become horrible.
The sheer amount of information available is immense, almost overwhelming.
And so finding things that were relevant was very difficult.
You might search for some important topic and you got somebody's kid's term paper on it, you got somebody who'd written about it, whatever.
You couldn't find anything anymore because the stuff you were looking for was like 100 pages down.
But Brin and Page think they found a solution.
The thing that really shifted was the recognition that deciding whether a particular thing was relevant to your search was not just a matter of looking at what was in it. You want to look for pages that other people think are valuable.
It's an idea they borrow from their parents.
Both Sergey and Larry were academic kids. Their families were professors, they were graduate students, and they were extremely familiar with the way that citations work in scientific literature. I write a paper, other people who think it's a good paper put a footnote in their paper pointing to my paper. And maybe you could take that same structure and import it to the way that people link one page to another. So if lots of people link to my page, it probably means it's a good page.
The idea was to build a system that you could reliably count how popular something was.
They named their search method after the mathematical term for one, followed by 100 zeros, intentionally misspelled.
I remember this day, the first search I did on Google was dramatically better than all the search that I had tried previous to that.
Page and Brin, who are planning to stay in school and finish their PhDs, set out to sell their spiffy new tool.
They were looking to license the technology, and you often think you produce something wonderful and other people would love the baby you've created and would want to raise it, but the reality is they got other things going on and it doesn't look as pretty to them as it does to you.
They spend a year looking, but no one will pay for the rights to their search engine. So they ask David Cheriton, who's an investor as well as a professor, if he can help them find money to start their own company. In 1998, he asks a Stanford alumnus who co-founded Sun Microsystems to come to his home to meet Page and Brin.
David thought it would be useful enough for us to meet and just sort of talk over of what it means to start a company if you're still a Stanford student. So we met at David's house in Palo Alto, and it was like early morning at 8 o'clock, and I had a 9 o'clock meeting at Cisco, so I didn't have much time.
Larry and Sergey arrived first, and so they were out there on the front porch with me and connected into my Ethernet at home. And Andy pulled up in his Porsche and hopped out, and they demoed the Google running on this laptop.
It was working astonishingly well. I mean, even with this small demo. So clearly, I thought this was going to work. That was not even the question. The only question was, how would they make money with this? So the next question was like, what's the business model? How do you monetize this? And they would say, well, we can then link this all to these relevant ads. So relative to the search term you have, they could have this unlimited ad inventory and just you search for a tennis racket. Here's an ad from people who want to sell you tennis rackets, and and they will charge 5 cents a click for that, which is still the basic fee today. So in the back of my mind, I was calculating, they're going to get 1 million clicks a day at 5 cents a click, $50,000 a day. They cannot go broke. So it was clear that this was a money-making machine.
So he said, I don't want you guys to have to, take too low a valuation or to have to worry too much about these money things right now. Why don't I just write you a check? So he went back to his car, came back with his checkbook, and he wrote us a check for $100,000.
A new company is born, and soon a new verb, to Google. The website pulls in so much ad revenue that Google quickly becomes a very big business. When it goes public in 2004, it's worth $23 billion. By 2017, it's one of the most valuable companies on Earth, worth $600 billion. But as Google has prospered, it has also accumulated a huge amount of information about its users. And other tech companies have done the same, raising fears about their unchecked power.
There is an increasing realization of the ways that the technologies we're developing could be used for bad.
When you have a smartphone, they know what you looked at, they knew where you drove to, they know who you called, they knew what banking you did, what you bought. They could guess what you're going to do next. I think any company, whether it be Google, Amazon, Facebook, that has that much information about so many people and their activities, you've got to wonder, what will happen when a single company has this much information on people? I think for the most part, these tools, benign, fantastic for the human race, more knowledge, great. But there is this other side. Where does that go?